They slid a $500,000 check across my glass desk. 20 years ago, they threw me out into a December blizzard with nothing but $50 and a baby growing in my belly. Now, they want a genius grandson for a sinking Senate campaign. They think money can buy back the garbage they tossed out, but they have no idea that their perfect political script is about to burn their entire empire to the ground. Hello to our wonderful audience at Daisy Revenge Stories. We want to be completely honest with you. YouTube recently disabled our channel's monetization, leaving us without the budget to keep operating. If you enjoy our stories, please consider supporting us with just $1 by scanning the QR code on the screen or clicking the donation link in the description or pinned comment, so we can pay our hardworking team to continue bringing you these tales. My name is Madison Evans, and I learned a very long time ago that blood is nothing more than a biological technicality. It was a remarkably quiet Thursday morning at my company, Aegis Core Analytics. I sat in my corner office overlooking the city skyline, reviewing the final security protocols for a major software launch. The serenity of the morning shattered when the private intercom on my desk buzzed. My head of security sounded tense, informing me that I had two uninvited guests demanding entry in the lobby. He did not even need to describe them. The crisp, authoritative voices echoing faintly in the background of the call were unmistakable. Arthur and Eleanor Evans had arrived. They did not wait for my permission to enter. The heavy glass door of my office swung open, and my parents walked in with the exact same suffocating arrogance they had always carried through the marble halls of the Boston political elite. 2 decades had passed, putting a few more gray hairs at Arthur's temples and tightening the surgical precision of Eleanor's face, but their core remained unchanged. Neither of them offered a polite hello. There was no awkward hesitation, no feigned maternal warmth, and certainly no apology for the 20 years of dead silence between us. Arthur bypassed the luxurious leather guest chairs entirely. He marched straight up to my desk, reached into the inner pocket of his bespoke tailored suit, and pulled out a crisp slip of paper. With a sharp flick of his wrist, he slid it across the smooth glass surface. The piece of paper stopped right at the edge of my keyboard. It was a cashier's check made out for $500,000. "You are going to bring your son to the Future America Gala next Saturday evening," Arthur stated. It was not a request. It was a military directive. "The entire event will be broadcast live across national networks. We need a perfect family portrait. 3 generations standing together on the main stage, projecting unity, success, and strong family values to the voters." I looked down at the check, then slowly lifted my gaze to meet his cold, calculating eyes. It took my analytical brain exactly 3 seconds to piece together the entire pathetic puzzle. Arthur was currently running for a highly contested seat in the United States Senate, but his poll numbers were in an absolute freefall, specifically struggling with the millennial and Gen Z demographics. Young voters saw him as exactly what he was, an out-of-touch, ruthless relic of the past. His public relations team must have stumbled upon last month's feature article in a business magazine highlighting my success with Aegis Core Analytics. They saw my name, noted that I was a single mother, and realized they had struck political gold. I had watched his recent televised interviews. He had been feeding the press a completely fabricated narrative about his brilliant, tech prodigy grandson from Silicon Valley. Now, he desperately needed a physical prop to secure the youth vote. And he arrogantly thought he could just buy us to play the supporting roles in his fiction. "The answer is no," I said softly, my voice perfectly level, not even bothering to touch the piece of paper. That was when Eleanor stepped forward from the shadows of the doorway. My mother had always preferred the elegant execution over the blunt force trauma her husband favored. She placed her manicured hands on the back of the chair and offered a smile that was entirely devoid of warmth. "Madison, darling," she purred, her tone dripping with venomous sweetness. "We have been reading so much about your little data company. It seems you are finalizing bids for several highly lucrative federal defense contracts. It would be a terrible shame if certain influential members of the Government Appropriations Committee suddenly developed deep concerns about your corporate security clearances. You know how these things go." Government contracts can be frozen indefinitely over the smallest administrative doubts. A heavy, suffocating silence settled over the spacious room. They stood there waiting, expecting panic. They expected the frightened, helpless 16-year-old girl they had thrown out into the freezing snow all those years ago to finally crack under the pressure. Instead, a cold, terrifying calm washed over my entire body. I looked at the two people who had discarded me like worthless trash, instantly recognizing that they had just blindly handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy them. I reached out, picked up the heavy paper check, and slowly folded it neatly in half. I looked up and gave them a soft, measured smile that revealed absolutely nothing of the storm raging inside my mind. "I will think about it," I said quietly. The aggressive tension in their shoulders vanished instantly. Arthur adjusted his expensive silk tie, a sickening look of smug triumph crossing his face. My mother gave a curt nod of approval. They turned around and walked out of my office, absolutely certain that their money and political intimidation had won yet again. They had no idea they had just confidently stepped right into a trap that I had been unknowingly preparing for 20 years. The mahogany walls of my father's study always felt like a velvet-lined coffin. 20 years ago, on a freezing December night in our sprawling Massachusetts estate, that room became the exact place where my childhood officially died. The wind outside howled with a violent, animalistic fury, throwing sharp sheets of snow against the heavy stained glass windows. Yet, the temperature inside the room, fueled by a roaring fire in the massive stone hearth, felt infinitely colder than the blizzard raging outdoors. I was 16 years old, my knees visibly trembling, standing barefoot on the edge of the rare Persian rug. My arms were wrapped tightly around my stomach in a desperate, futile attempt to hide the undeniable truth of the life growing inside me. In the Evans household, reputation was our religion. There were no gods, no prayers, and certainly no forgiveness. There were only poll numbers, social standings, and the flawless political image that my parents worshipped with terrifying devotion. A pregnant teenage daughter was not a tragedy to them. It was not a moment for compassion or guidance. It was a catastrophic public relations crisis. It was a dark, ugly stain on the pristine, carefully curated canvas they presented to the elite circles of Boston society. What terrified me the most that night was the absolute, suffocating silence. There was no screaming. There were no shattered glasses thrown against the wall, no hysterical sobbing from my mother, no disappointed, fiery lectures from my father. Their reaction was completely devoid of human emotion. Instead of crying for her daughter, my mother sat rigidly in a velvet wingback chair, sipping a glass of expensive scotch. Her eyes were utterly dead, flat and emotionless, as she stared at me like I was a rotting animal that had somehow crawled onto her immaculate carpet. Arthur did not pace the room. He did not ask who the father was or how I was feeling. He simply picked up his heavy brass telephone and dialed a number he knew by heart. Within 30 minutes, our family lawyer arrived, his dark overcoat still dusted with fresh snow. He unpacked his leather briefcase on my father's massive oak desk, spreading out thick stacks of legal documents with the cold, clinical detachment of a mortician preparing a body for burial. "Sign them," Arthur commanded. His voice was barely above a whisper, yet it cut through the thick air of the room like a razor blade. I looked down at the papers through tear-blurred eyes. They were not emancipation forms or medical documents. They were ironclad non-disclosure agreements and a legally binding renunciation of my inheritance. I was to vanish from their reality. I was to forfeit my family name, my financial security, and my entire history. The legal jargon was dense, but the message was blindingly clear. If I ever spoke to the press, if I ever claimed to be Arthur and Eleanor's daughter, or if I ever sought a single penny from them, the legal penalties outlined in those pages would destroy me completely. I picked up the heavy gold pen. My hand was shaking so violently I could barely form the cursive letters of my own name on the dotted line. But Arthur was not finished. He was a seasoned politician, and politicians always built a failsafe. He stepped closer to me, his tall frame blocking the warm, flickering light of the fireplace. He reached into his tailored suit pocket and pulled out a small, silver digital voice recorder. He pressed a button on the side, and a tiny red light blinked to life, glowing like a demon's eye in the dim room. "For the legal record, Madison," he said. His tone shifted instantly into something terrifyingly smooth, dripping with fake, rehearsed paternal concern. "We want you to stay. We love you. Are you absolutely certain you want to run away and abandon this family?" I stared at him in pure, paralyzed shock. My mind spun wildly. He was fabricating an alibi right in front of me. He was trapping me in a lie. He needed a soundbite, a carefully manipulated piece of audio he could edit and keep locked away in a secure vault, just in case I ever tried to return and ruin his senatorial career. He wanted to be able to play a tape to the world and say his troubled daughter ran away into the night despite their desperate, loving pleas. "Say it," he hissed, dropping the facade for a split second. His heavy fingers dug so hard into my shoulder that I felt the skin bruise instantly beneath my shirt. "Say you are leaving voluntarily. Say it right now, or you will not even leave this room with the clothes on your back." The betrayal was so absolute, so profoundly evil, that it finally snapped the fragile, desperate tether binding me to them. The terrified, obedient little girl died in that exact moment. A cold, hard instinct for sheer survival took her place. I stared right past him, looking at the blinking red light. "I am leaving voluntarily," I said, my voice hollow, flat, and completely dead. Arthur smiled, a chilling, victorious twist of his lips. He clicked the recorder off and slipped it back into his pocket. At exactly 11 o'clock at night, the heavy oak front door of the estate slammed shut behind me. I heard the heavy brass deadbolt click firmly into place. I stood on the frozen stone porch, completely alone in the world. I had a thin nylon backpack containing 2 sweaters, a single pair of jeans, and exactly $50 that the lawyer had pressed into my palm as a pathetic severance package for my entire existence. The blizzard swallowed me whole the second I stepped off the porch. The wind roared like a freight train, tearing at my thin coat, driving sharp needles of ice directly into my face. The pristine, wealthy suburban streets were completely deserted, buried under a foot of rapidly accumulating snow. The streetlights flickered violently in the roaring wind, casting long, monstrous shadows across the blinding white landscape. I began to walk. I did not look back at the massive brick mansion shining warmly in the dark. I knew with absolute certainty that if I stopped moving, I would freeze to death on the sidewalk, and they would probably just bury me quietly to avoid the morning scandal. I wrapped my arms tightly around my torso, shielding my unborn child from the bitter wind, focusing all my energy on simply placing one numb foot in front of the other. I walked for 4 miles through the blinding whiteout. Every single breath felt like inhaling crushed glass. My boots soaked through within the first mile. My toes turned entirely numb, then began burning with a deep, agonizing pain, until the pain simply faded into a terrifying nothingness. The grand, sprawling estate slowly gave way to dark, empty woods, and then to the barren, industrial edge of the county line where the streetlights ended completely. My vision started to tunnel. The edges of the world bled into absolute black. The howling wind faded into a muffled, underwater hum. My knees finally buckled under the weight of the cold. I hit the frozen asphalt hard, scraping my hands raw, but the cold was so deep, I could not even feel the blood welling up. I crawled the last few agonizing yards toward the only structure visible in the impenetrable darkness. It was an abandoned, rusted gas station with a sagging aluminum roof, sitting isolated by the side of the highway. I curled into a tight, shivering ball against the icy metal of the locked front door. Squeezing my eyes shut, feeling the heavy snow quickly blanketing my body, I thought it was the absolute end. I thought Arthur had won. But as the darkness finally pulled me under, I felt a sudden, shocking warmth. Heavy hands, rough and calloused from years of hard labor, were lifting me from the snowbank. A deep, gruff voice cut through the roaring storm, pulling me back from the icy edge of death and guiding me toward the man who would truly become my family. The man who pulled me out of the snowbank that night was Marcus Vance. He was a combat veteran with a bad knee, a permanent scowl, and a heart larger than the entire state of Massachusetts. Marcus owned a heavy-duty diesel truck repair shop located right off the interstate, a dirty, loud, and brilliantly honest place. When I woke up wrapped in a heavy thermal blanket near a roaring space heater, he did not ask for my name or demand to know who had hurt me. He just handed me a steaming mug of black coffee and told me there was an empty storage room in the back of the garage. He said I could stay there if I was willing to sweep floors and manage the inventory books to earn my keep. I traded the velvet and silk of my childhood for the harsh, permanent smell of motor oil, diesel exhaust, and the deafening screech of pneumatic wrenches. The back room of that garage became my sanctuary. 6 months later, I gave birth to Leo, right there in the local county hospital with Marcus pacing the waiting room like an anxious father. I did not have the luxury of postpartum depression or self-pity. I had a newborn son to feed, and I had a fire burning inside my chest that was entirely fueled by pure, unadulterated rage. I worked the graveyard shift at a diner down the road, pouring cheap coffee for long-haul truckers while balancing a heavy math textbook on my hip. I earned my General Educational Development Diploma in exactly 6 months. After that, I applied for every single academic grant available and secured a full-ride scholarship to a state university. Majoring in data science, I slept exactly 3 hours a night. While the wealthy kids in my classes went skiing on the weekends, I was sitting in the freezing garage office, wrapped in an old jacket, writing the foundational code for what would eventually become Aegis Core Analytics. I built my empire brick by brutal brick. I did not rely on venture capital from Boston elites or networking events at exclusive country clubs. I used the iron discipline I learned from watching Marcus run his shop, combined with the cold, calculating ruthlessness I had inherited from my parents. I channeled all of that darkness completely into creating impenetrable cybersecurity architectures. What started as a modest encryption software running on a second-hand server in a greasy truck shop evolved into a highly classified firm protecting sensitive government databases. I clawed my way out of the dirt, and I did it completely in the shadows, keeping my maiden name buried and my personal life locked behind impenetrable digital firewalls. But the absolute best thing I created during those 20 years of relentless grinding was not a software program. It was Leo. If Arthur Evans actually knew the grandson he was currently bragging about on national television, he would probably have a massive stroke right on the debate stage. Arthur was telling the press that Leo was some slick, suit-wearing Silicon Valley prodigy who discussed artificial intelligence algorithms over caviar. The reality was magnificently different. Leo is 19 years old. He stands 6 feet 3 inches tall, with thick, broad shoulders, built by hoisting heavy engine blocks rather than swinging golf clubs at a country club. Both of his arms are heavily tattooed with intricate mechanical designs, and his hands are permanently calloused from hard, honest labor. He is not a tech executive. Leo is a master welder and a custom classic car restorer. He could not care less about tech stocks, corporate boardrooms, or political campaigns. Give him a rusted-out 1968 muscle car and a welding torch, and he is the happiest man on earth. He loves the freedom of the open road, the grit of manual labor, and the simple honesty of a job done with his own 2 hands. Marcus Vance raised him right alongside me. Marcus taught Leo how to throw a punch, how to rebuild a broken transmission, and most importantly, how to look a man dead in the eye and tell him the undeniable truth. Marcus was the only grandfather Leo had ever known or needed. He provided the steady, unconditional love that the Evans family was completely incapable of feeling. We were perfectly content living our quiet, fiercely independent lives. I kept my identity strictly disconnected from the Evans dynasty, ensuring no one in the corporate world knew about my toxic bloodline. We were safe. We were completely untraceable. That was until last month, when a highly ambitious financial journalist decided to dig a little too deeply into the background of the woman who built Aegis Core Analytics from absolute nothing. A seemingly harmless profile piece accidentally connected a few obscure dots regarding my early legal name change, and before I could scrub the data from the internet, the public relations vultures running Arthur's campaign found it. They saw the words single mother and tech CEO, completely ignored the reality of who we actually were, and aggressively decided to spin a fake narrative to save his sinking poll numbers. They thought they were just manipulating another convenient political prop. They failed to realize they had just kicked the door wide open for the ghosts of their past to finally return and demand payment in full. The flickering light of a greasy wall-mounted television illuminated the dusty tool chests inside Marcus's garage. Leo was wiping thick axle grease from his hands with a red shop rag. His dark eyes locked on the screen. I sat on an overturned heavy plastic crate beside him, nursing a lukewarm cup of black coffee. On the screen, my father was giving a primetime interview to a major news network. My grandson and I frequently have dinner together to discuss the future of artificial intelligence in America, Arthur declared to the nodding journalist, his voice dripping with a fabricated, folksy warmth that made my stomach turn. He is a brilliant young man, a true visionary, and I am thrilled to announce that he will be joining me on stage at the Future America Gala next Saturday. Leo let out a loud, barking laugh, tossing the dirty rag onto a steel workbench. I do not even know what an artificial intelligence algorithm actually looks like. Mom, does he know I eat gas station hot dogs for dinner while watching monster truck rallies? I did not laugh. My mind was already racing, calculating vectors of attack with cold precision. Arthur had crossed a dangerous line from desperate political maneuvering into absolute delusion. He was trapping himself in a massive public lie on national television, which meant he was entirely vulnerable. I left the garage and went straight to the secure server room I had built in my basement. I needed to know exactly why my parents were suddenly so desperate for a family reunion after 20 years of absolute silence. I reached out to a former senior penetration tester who used to work on my red team at Aegis Core Analytics, a brilliant digital ghost who owed me a substantial favor. I instructed him to quietly slip past the firewalls of Arthur's campaign public relations team and dig through their internal communications. It took my contact less than 4 hours to find the rotting core of the apple. The political campaign was completely broke. Actually, it was significantly worse than broke. Arthur was facing an impending, highly classified federal investigation over massive, undisclosed offshore financial transfers masked as campaign donations. The federal auditors and investigative journalists were already circling the story, ready to tear his career apart. His political strategists had panicked. They desperately needed a media distraction so incredibly loud, wholesome, and heartwarming that it would dominate the news cycle and bury the financial scandal entirely. The model grandfather reuniting with his tech genius grandson was not just a campaign strategy. It was a calculated, desperate smokescreen meant to save him from federal prison. But the digital trail did not stop there. While my contact was inside the private servers of the family's legal fixers, he stumbled across a heavily encrypted cloud backup belonging to my father's old estate lawyer. This was the exact same lawyer who had orchestrated my eviction 20 years ago. The encryption protocol they used to secure the archives was outdated by a full decade. For a data security company like mine, breaking it was like kicking open a rotting wooden door. When the decrypted files finished downloading to my secure drive, my breath caught sharply in my throat. Among the scanned legal drafts and property deeds was a small, high-fidelity audio file labeled with my initials and the exact date of that terrible December night. I clicked play. The crystal clear, unedited audio of my 16-year-old self weeping filled the quiet room. But this time, it was not the cleanly spliced, manipulated version Arthur had engineered to protect himself. It captured absolutely everything. It captured the sharp clink of the ice cubes in my mother's glass. It captured Arthur's voice, not pleading with me to stay, but viciously threatening me. I heard his exact, unfiltered words. "You are a disgrace to this house. Take the money. Get out of here. And do not ever let me see that thing in your belly again." I finally had the weapon. I possessed the ultimate, indisputable proof of their monstrous nature. I gathered Leo and Marcus around the heavy steel workbench in the garage that evening. I did not sugarcoat a single detail. I played the raw audio file for them. I laid out the financial fraud, the political manipulation, and the fake narrative Arthur was selling to the national media. I told them exactly what my parents wanted us to do at the gala. I expected Leo to be angry, or perhaps overwhelmed by the sheer toxicity of the bloodline he came from. I watched his face carefully, bracing to comfort him. Instead, a slow, wicked grin spread across my son's face. He leaned his heavy forearms on the metal table, the intricate tattoos on his skin flexing under the harsh fluorescent lights. He was not intimidated by their wealth or their political power. He recognized them for exactly what they were, which was a pair of arrogant bullies, and Marcus had taught him exactly how to handle bullies. "They want a show on national television?" Leo asked, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous, chaotic excitement. "Then we give them a show. We do this exactly the Evans way, but we rewrite the script completely. We walk right through their front door and burn the whole circus down." Marcus chuckled deeply from his corner chair, crossing his massive arms over his chest. "I have a clean leather jacket the boy can borrow," he rumbled with a proud nod. A fierce, uncompromising pride swelled in my chest. My parents thought they were summoning a frightened victim and a polished corporate prop. They had no idea they were inviting a devastating storm right into their living room. I opened my encrypted laptop right there on the greasy workbench. I typed out a single, precise email to Arthur's chief of staff. "We will be there. Prepare the cameras." My phone vibrated relentlessly on the kitchen counter, lighting up the dim room with yet another demanding text message from Eleanor. She had spent the entire morning flooding my inbox with strict, obsessive instructions regarding our physical appearance for the evening. 2 massive, velvet-lined delivery boxes had arrived by private courier just after sunrise. The first contained a suffocatingly conservative, heavily beaded designer gown that she expected me to wear. The second held a custom-tailored, painfully stiff tuxedo, accompanied by a harsh note ordering Leo to get a professional haircut immediately to hide his unruly curls. I stared at the absurdly expensive garments, pieces of fabric worth thousands of dollars, for exactly 10 seconds. Then, I picked up both boxes, walked out the back door, and dropped them straight into the greasy black garbage bin in the alleyway. The evening of the Future America Gala finally descended upon Boston. Arthur had spared absolutely no expense to construct his grand illusion. The grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel was transformed into a glittering fortress of wealth, power, and political influence. 500 very important guests, ranging from powerful state senators to deep-pocketed corporate lobbyists, sat at tables draped in heavy white silk. Dozens of journalists and national television crews had set up a massive perimeter of high-definition cameras, their lenses eagerly waiting to broadcast this miraculous family reunion to millions of living rooms across the entire country. The atmosphere was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, roasted prime rib, and the suffocating desperation of a political campaign clinging to life. They thought they were in complete control of the narrative. They had absolutely no idea that my team was already deep inside their walls. 2 days prior, under the completely untraceable shell of a generic audiovisual subcontracting firm, a specialized unit of engineers from Aegis Core Analytics had quietly assumed full administrative control over the ballroom's entire digital infrastructure. We did not need to hack our way into the Ritz-Carlton with brute force. My lead engineer had simply bought the master access codes from a disgruntled vendor, allowing us to completely hijack the massive digital LED screens flanking the main stage and override the hotel's central audio mixing board. I was sitting in the back of a black sport utility vehicle, parked discreetly in the underground loading dock, holding a sleek tablet that served as the digital detonator for the entire evening. Inside the sprawling ballroom, the string quartet faded into complete silence as Arthur confidently approached the main podium. The bright stage lights illuminated his carefully styled silver hair, giving him the fabricated aura of a wise, benevolent patriarch. He gripped the edges of the heavy wooden lectern, scanning the crowd with a practiced, sorrowful smile. "Family," Arthur began, his deep voice echoing through the massive hall with a sickening, rehearsed sincerity. "In these highly turbulent times, family is the only anchor that holds us steady. We often lose our way in the relentless pursuit of ambition, but true leadership requires a strong moral compass. It requires boundless love, deep forgiveness, and the absolute courage to bring our loved ones back into the fold." The elite audience watched in captivated silence. Camera shutters clicked frantically, capturing every single manufactured emotion crossing his face. "Tonight is not just about the future of America," Arthur declared, raising his voice to a dramatic, triumphant crescendo. "Tonight is about the future of my own legacy. I am incredibly proud to introduce a young man who represents the absolute best of the next generation, a brilliant mind, an exceptional talent, and a testament to the unbreakable bond of our bloodline. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome my grandson." Arthur extended his right arm gracefully, pointing directly toward the towering, gold-plated double doors at the far end of the grand ballroom. The entire room shifted in perfect synchronization. 500 heads turned instantly. Every single television camera aggressively pivoted away from the stage, locking their glass lenses onto the heavy wooden doors. The grand chandelier lights dimmed strategically, and a brilliant, blinding spotlight slashed through the darkness, hitting the main entrance. The tension in the room was absolute, pulled tight like a steel wire about to snap. As the heavy brass handles finally clicked loudly and the doors slowly began to swing wide open. The heavy brass doors swung inward. The blinding spotlight hit us immediately, casting long, sharp shadows across the imported marble floor. I did not step into the grand ballroom wearing the suffocating, heavily beaded designer gown my mother had tried to force upon me. Instead, I wore a razor-sharp, tailored midnight blue power suit that moved with absolute authority. But I was not the one who caused the collective, audible gasp to ripple through the sea of 500 elite guests. That honor belonged entirely to the young man walking comfortably by my side. Leo had not cut his unruly dark hair, nor had he even looked at the custom tuxedo Eleanor had sent. He walked into the Ritz-Carlton wearing a scuffed, faded vintage leather jacket, a plain black t-shirt, and heavy steel toe work boots that still had faint traces of motor oil baked into the leather. Both of his sleeves were rolled up, putting the intricate, sprawling tattoos on his muscular forearms on full display for the national television cameras. He did not look nervous. He looked like a wolf casually strolling into a room full of exceptionally fat, panicked sheep. He carried a posture of absolute, unbothered arrogance. The silence in the room was deafening. The frantic clicking of camera shutters completely stopped. The campaign public relations team, standing in the shadows near the velvet curtains, looked as if they had just been struck by lightning. This was absolutely not the polished, suit-wearing Silicon Valley prodigy they had promised the press. Up on the main stage, the color rapidly drained from Eleanor's meticulously maintained face. Arthur, however, was a seasoned politician. His survival instincts kicked in. He forcefully stretched his face into a tight, strained smile. Gripping the edges of the wooden lectern so hard, his knuckles turned completely white. He gestured toward us, opening his mouth to try and salvage his crumbling script, desperate to spin the visual disaster unfolding in front of him. He never got the chance. I did not walk toward his waiting arms. I stopped dead in the center aisle of the ballroom. A national network reporter was standing frozen to my left, holding a wireless microphone. I calmly reached out and pulled the microphone directly from his loose grip. The reporter was too shocked to even resist. Arthur leaned into his podium microphone. "Madison, darling, please come up to the stage and join us." I gave a subtle, almost invisible nod toward the tiny camera hidden in my lapel, signaling my engineering team waiting in the underground loading dock. Instantly, Arthur's microphone went completely dead. A second later, the state-of-the-art digital LED screens covering the entire wall behind the stage aggressively flickered. The carefully curated, patriotic campaign logos vanished entirely. In their place, blown up to a staggering, inescapable size, was the scanned image of the brutal non-disclosure agreement he had forced me to sign 20 years ago, complete with his distinct signature. Right next to it was a high-resolution image of the cashier's check for $500,000, the pathetic bribe they had tried to use to buy us back just a few days prior. The audience erupted into a chaotic murmur of confusion and shock. Arthur whipped his head around, staring up at the towering screens in absolute paralyzed horror. Then, the true punishment began. My engineers bypassed the hotel's safety protocols and hijacked the main audio mixing board, cranking the massive ballroom speakers to their absolute maximum volume. The unedited, raw audio file from that freezing December night roared through the grand hall, echoing off the crystal chandeliers. The sound of ice clinking in a glass, the sound of my 16-year-old self weeping softly, and then, unmistakably clear, Arthur's cold, merciless voice thundered across the room. "You are a disgrace to this house. Take the money. Get out of here. And do not ever let me see that thing in your belly again." The collective shock of the room shattered into pure pandemonium. You could actually hear the exact moment the Evans political empire snapped in half. Wealthy donors and corporate lobbyists were already standing up from their silk-draped tables, aggressively pushing their chairs back, desperate to evacuate the room before the national cameras could capture them sitting at the event of a ruined man. Arthur was trembling violently, his perfectly styled hair now disheveled, staring out at the collapsing room with wide, terrified eyes. Leo walked right past me, ascending the short carpeted stairs to the main stage with heavy, deliberate steps. He did not look angry, he just looked thoroughly amused. He walked right up to his grandfather, reached out, and smoothly took the live microphone I had handed him earlier. Leo turned his back on Arthur entirely, facing the sea of flashing cameras and shouting journalists. "I am a welder, not a tech CEO," Leo announced, his deep, resonant voice cutting effortlessly through the chaos of the room. He raised his heavily tattooed arm and pointed a calloused finger straight toward the front row. "And my only grandfather is sitting right over there." The cameras immediately violently pivoted to where he was pointing, sitting comfortably in a velvet chair, wearing a clean but wonderfully simple button-down shirt, was Marcus Vance. The massive, rough mechanic crossed his arms over his broad chest and smiled with absolute, beaming pride. The destruction was instantaneous and absolute. Dozens of journalists abandoned their designated press pens, swarming the stage like bloodthirsty sharks, shouting aggressive, damning questions at a completely broken Arthur. Eleanor was already fleeing through a side exit, covering her face with her designer clutch. In less than 5 minutes, a legacy built on decades of lies, intimidation, and cruelty was entirely buried under the weight of its own undeniable truth. We did not stay to watch the vultures pick the bones clean. I dropped the microphone on the marble floor. Leo walked down the stairs, wrapped his heavy arm around my shoulders, and guided me toward the main exit. Marcus met us at the doors, giving Leo a firm, loving clap on the back. We walked out of the suffocating luxury of the hotel and stepped into the crisp, biting night air of Boston. We completely ignored the shouts of the reporters trying to chase us down the sidewalk. We climbed into the cab of a beautifully restored 1972 pickup truck that Leo had rebuilt entirely with his own hands. The heavy V8 engine roared to life with a satisfying, rumbling power, and we drove away, leaving the smoldering wreckage of the Evans family far behind us in the rearview mirror. An hour later, we were sitting in a worn vinyl booth at a brightly lit, 24-hour roadside diner. The smell of cheap coffee and fried grease hung in the air, a scent that felt infinitely more like home than any mansion ever could. I watched Leo laugh as he stole a French fry from Marcus's plate, the two of them arguing happily about a transmission rebuild they had scheduled for Monday morning. I took a slow, deep breath, feeling a profound, untouchable peace settle over my heart. I had finally learned the absolute truth. Family is not determined by biological genetics or legal documents. True family is simply made up of the people who refuse to let you freeze when the brutal storms of life finally hit. Thank you so much to everyone who tuned in to listen to this story today. I truly appreciate you being here with us. I would love to know where you are listening from, so please leave a comment and let me know. If you thought this story was great and you want to help support our channel, please consider donating just $1. You can scan the QR code for our donation page right here on the screen, or you can use the donation link in the description or the pinned comment. Your support helps us pay our hardworking staff so they can support their families and keep creating even better stories for all of you to enjoy.